Hello and welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is our health wrap-up episode from the health conference in Las Vegas. We are not live at the show. This time we ended up deciding to try and fit the wrap-up in remotely after returning home. So I've just gotten off of an airplane earlier this morning. Matt Holt, who is my guest today, got in last night. Matt is the editor of the healthcare blog. He's a longtime player in the space. He has some event experience of his own, ran the Health2O event for some time, and injured his back pretty badly at the show. So sorry that happened to you, Matt, and thank you so much for doing this anyway.
I know it was pretty remarkable, Jonah. I was wandering around Monday night. I was part of the UCSF Health Awards, which I think you were at. I was charging around parties, enjoying myself doing the regular thing. Looking forward to Tuesday. I'm going to see the super animated rapper that they had on. Actually, that may be unfair. Ludacris may still be a big famous rapper. I don't know. I don't follow the rap scene enough. And I actually did a main stage presentation on Tuesday, moderated with Cheryl Pegas and from Walmart, Sachin Jain from Scan. And as I was walking around, my back, which had been a little bit tickling me, just started collapsing. I ended up having quite an experience at the Hinge Health booth, trying to get them to use their MSK tools to fix me. But I ended up getting carted off the floor in a wheelchair. So I'm still in a bit of trouble now. So not the greatest experience.
I mean, it's pretty cool that you went right to the digital health that was at the show to see if you could make it work for you.
Well, actually, and I've got a little video I need to put together because I took some video of me doing it. I went, first off, I was misled by one of my, I think it was Kevin Wong on Health Tech Nerds. Said that there were going to be PTs, like physical therapists, at the Sword Health booth. So I saw that booth and I went there and they had very nice chocolate instead. But so I then wandered around. I was hobbling around and I got as far as, and I noticed there was the Hinge Health booth. They were advertising a tool called Enzo, which I didn't know, but is a little, it's like one of those things that physical therapists put on your thigh, your back, that has like a low stimulation buzz, except for it's a high stimulation buzz. It's a company they bought, and they actually put one on me, and they had a very, very kind physical therapist who put one on me and let me, use it for most of the day. And you can turn the effect up, and it certainly helped with the pain initially. But I think whatever I've done to myself is so bad, I need more care than that. So it wasn't a great experience. It wasn't, the Hinge Health experience was nice, and what they've built in terms of exercises, and some of the new products they have coming out were actually pretty cool. And you can see the advantage of remote physical therapy is pretty interesting compared to in-person physical therapy. But it didn't actually. Unfortunately, it wasn't a cure. I don't know. I guess these things don't get cured overnight. I was wheelchaired on and off the plane, so I'm like one of those. We always wonder who are those people who are perfectly fine and healthy, but they're sitting in a wheelchair. And now I was one. Anyway,
so I want to talk a little bit about broadly some of the trends, some of what we heard at the show. These things, for me, a lot of the value is just getting all these people together and finding out what's on people's minds and how people are thinking about different trends. So I know you didn't see a ton of sessions. A lot of people come to these to do mainly meetings. I was pretty focused in my sessions on pharma stuff, but I want to just kind of take the temperature. But the first thing I want to talk about, just to get it out of the way, the elephant in the room, is I think a lot of the conversation I hear at Health is actually about health, at the event itself and how it is fitting in the ecosystem, should fit into the ecosystem, whether the presentations are sort of valuable and authentic. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but I want to address it up front, especially, you're an events guy. I know you have opinions. What did you think? I mean, the criticism I hear is that you get these incredible guests, you get these really top-notch movers and shakers in healthcare, and you get them on stage, and then they just get to give a sales pitch. They don't really get, pressed on the important stuff.
Well, I mean, so I was, I believe, asked to moderate my session by Sachin Jain, who had actually been invited on by Cheryl Pegas from Walmart, because he thought I would give him a hard time, and I did, right? So and I got a couple of tweets saying, "Wow, we don't see this a lot at Health." And I think there is a little bit going on in the main stage sessions where they do it a different way than certainly Indu and I used to do it at Health 2.0, and to some extent how some other conferences do it. But it's where they essentially say this is a session where United Healthcare or Optum or whomever is going to tell you about what they're doing, right? And they don't tend to. I mean, it's one of those questions where you don't know. And it's always a very thin line for every single conference as to who, when you have somebody on that stage who's also a sponsor and is kind of there's also a big name in the industry, how much you can go around upsetting them, make it difficult to come back. It's not. Then these folks are not politicians. They don't have to come to your conference or the rest of it. And I think if I was to put words in Jonathan Weiner's mouth, I'd rather have these people there telling me what they're doing than get sort of confrontation on the stage. There has definitely been confrontation on the Health stage. There's been people going at each other a little bit over the years, usually in the breakout panels more than the main stage stuff from what I've seen. But I think I would tend to agree that it's not, doesn't have a characteristic as being sort of an aggressive show, or even for that matter, to be honest with you, much of a themed show in terms of how it's done. And certainly, if I was to contrast it with Health 2.0, let's be clear, HLTH, much bigger and much more successful than Health 2.0 ever was. But Indu and I always tried to have like our themes of what's going on and try and fit the main stage sessions and make the main stage much more important in the context of the show. And I think you're right. I think they have great people and great presentations at HLTH, but the number of people in the audience of the people who are there, you probably had 10,000 people at the show. And, some of the audiences were especially on Sunday, there was some big crowds in some of the, some of the early main stage sessions, and in some of the breakout rooms were standing remotely. But in general, by the time Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday rolls around, I think most people are doing meetings. They're running a whole series of startup investor meetings with startups. They're running a whole series of, what they call hosted buyers. So, providers and plans meeting with startups. And I think that's where a lot of the focus is. And then you have all the exhibit hall is open the whole time. So if you recall HIMSS, traditionally has the exhibit hall closed during keynotes, but that's not how they do it. And I think it's fair enough. I mean, that's the way they're running their show. And whatever we might say about it, from the Moby Health and HIMSS perspective, maybe the Health perspective, they've certainly got the crowd there, right? I mean, I would never have thought there were 10,000 people who would be prepared to pay, the pretty stiff ticket price they have for a digital health show, but they've made it absolutely a must-be-at event if you're in the business. So
not only is the exhibit floor open all the time, but the geography of the show is constructed such that you cannot get to the sessions without walking through the exhibit floor constantly. There's session rooms all around the exhibit floor, and it's in the middle, which I think is really brilliant in terms of really making sure that the booths they're selling are accruing the value. But to your other point, I think I do agree with you on both counts. You can't. I understand where people are coming from when they say they want more controversy, they want to press people more. I mean, people are angry. They feel like healthcare's problems they don't just come out of the sky. People are responsible for them. And some of those people are at this event because you've got virtually all the stakeholders there. So let's hold the responsible stakeholders responsible. But of course, everyone, I think, disagrees on who is responsible for what. But I think you're right. You can't, if you just invite people and then, attack them, you probably are not going to have a conference for very long. I did see several of the moderators who are mostly professional journalists, pressing, yourself included. I thought there was a session with a CMS administrator where she asked some really good questions, which mostly got dodged. But I guess that's the thing. Like, the reporters asked good questions, but even then, people aren't under any obligation to answer them. And, it's not a very good presentation if a reporter just keeps asking the same question in the interviewee keeps dodging it. So I think you're right. The value is in kind of the explanations and I think the collaborations, right? When you get multiple people together on a panel saying, this is how we do it, this is how we do it, then you do start to get a little tension. And I will say the two places I did see controversy, one was telehealth panel with Roy Schoenberg and ZocDoc CEO, whose name is escaping me right now.
Is that Cyrus Masumi, I think?
Yeah.
Or was he the guy who left and is suing? Is it Oliver? I can't remember which one. It's Oliver.
Oliver, yeah, that's who it was.
Right.
And there was a little bit of tension there around, what's going on with telehealth and what's the end game for telehealth. That was interesting.
I did think there were some missed opportunities. I went to a panel which had great people on it, including the CEO of Oscar and some others. And, the elephant in the room around Oscar is the company going to be in business? What the hell's going on with these? And I think Julie Yu from Andreessen was on the panel as well. And, what's going on with these companies? And the topic of the panel was, when to know how to pivot, which was interesting, but they kind of stuck to the topic of the panel. I was going, that's not what the conversation, if you look at the conversation online and elsewhere about Oscar and now, especially in the stock markets, how do they survive? What happened when they went into MA and then left MA? They did this business with building a technology platform, trying to sell to other clients. It didn't work. That to me around Oscar and the change in Medicare Advantage and the change in exchanges would have been a more interesting conversation, but it wasn't what they were having, which, that may be the way it was set up. I don't know whether, and what you don't know, and from running conferences, it's number one, very tricky to get CEOs of companies, even well-funded startups on panels with each other if they if they feel they don't want to. The classic case was I tried to get Glenn Tillman and Jonathan Bush on a panel together forever, and I finally did it once and then never again. Right? And then the other issue is you don't know what the vibe of the people who've been putting the panel together has been, what they wanted to talk about when they do pre-discussions versus sort of what's the zeitgeist out there. And sometimes people attack the elephant in the room. Some people want to talk about the new stuff they're doing, and they have different audiences, right? They're trying to impress investors, potential partners, or potential acquirers, or whatever else. So, I think you don't get that. But I do think. I don't know if he was on the stage, but I know he was on the Stat conference. But David moved from Cerebral, answered some tough questions about what they've been up to. I talked to him off stage, and it was interesting. So it isn't the locus of where you get the really tough stuff done anymore. I don't think HLTH, but there's a lot of very interesting conversations going on, and probably I had more interesting conversations in the bar and in the corridors than I saw on stage.
Yeah, which is not nothing. And it makes sense. People do have to. Message control is huge in this industry. Particularly that's something I've learned since I've been in the pharma space, even more so. But
even more so, right?
So let's get to the real stuff, Matt. Let's talk about value-based care. I think that was a big thing. They had several speakers from CMS. There's your panel with Scan Health and Walmart, and there was a lot of conversation about like Medicare shared saving, Medicare Advantage. There have been some changes lately, partly as a result of the pandemic. Give me a little bit of a rundown. I don't track that space as closely as I used to. Give me a little bit of a rundown of kind of what's at issue there right now, and what are kind of some of the perspectives you heard.
Yeah, there's been a significant set of sort of policy arguments, which, by the way, have been around for a while, but have been really tuned this year. And it definitely came up in the panel I had with Sachin Jain, who runs a very successful but small Medicare plan called Scan Health. I didn't unfortunately see the CMS panel, but the big picture piece is sort of that Medicare Advantage has now grown to being about roughly half of the Medicare system. So it's real money. And there's a massive argument that's been playing out in health affairs and elsewhere, and actually on healthcare blog and elsewhere, between kind of Medicare Advantage supporters and detractors about whether Medicare Advantage is delivering, any value compared to Medicare fee-for-service, in terms of outcomes and improved experience for the members. And more importantly, is it saving any money to the government? And there's a massive argument about this. And frankly, even if you look at the policy players, MedPAC, which is a sort of independent committee, says it's not. And actually the CMS trustees, which is a separate report, says it is. But, it's so that's going on in the background. And there's clearly going to be more looking at and regulation of Medicare.
Yeah. At the CMS panel, the deputy administrator did say that like she was asked about that at the end, and she said basically like we're going to be having meetings and listening sessions and public comment trying to get to the bottom of this. Basically, it was kind of a non-answer, but it was at least like kind of an acknowledgement that, you know, CMS is not kind of taking for granted that Medicare Advantage is working.
I agree. And you would expect eventually Congress to be more pressing on this, but you know, with the change in the House, I doubt you're going to see so much on this. Although, you know, not everybody in the the Republicans are not unanimously, just because it's private, unanimously in favor of it. Given that there's a lot of complaints about Medicare Advantage from the provider side, and there's a lot of Republican connections on the provider side. Having said that, there's also the issue, which is definitely on, is that how quickly is value-based care going to whom from Medicare Advantage and elsewhere? And what I mean by that is, you look at the room, everyone's still going on about that we're creating a virtual first care product. A lot of that's going to be for Medicare, or we're a large provider organization or a large virtual provider organization, in the mold of digital health, and they're expecting value-based care payment to come down the track. But as we know, for decades now, value-based care has been a very small part of what's going on in terms of the overall share of payment compared to fee-for-service. And I did kind of enjoy the CEO of HCA, which is a big old world for-profit hospital chain, saying, we're all for value-based care, but let's not be rigorous about the kind of value-based, let's not be rigorous about, does that mean universal capitation for, there are things that you can do that are quote unquote value-based care that we can live with, and we'll still make our money. But clearly he wasn't interested in changing the current flow of the system at all. And those kinds of players are still very, very powerful. And I would, so I think this runs and runs. My sense is that if you look at a lot of the offerings, and I didn't see it, but I read up the new offering from the folks at Amazon. They're kind of not prepared to wait for value-based care. They're saying, can we build a tool that will take cash payment on the one hand, or with their acquisition of One Medical, can we get in the value stream of what's high-end fee-for-service, essentially? I'm still hearing a lot of people saying, we're going to stay where the market is, and the market isn't that value-based care yet. So, but a lot of people are still building, tools that they say are going to work in value-based care for the future, which isn't quite here yet. So I think it's interesting. I don't foresee a lot of change, and that's what I can tell you about my most interesting. I guess off the record, but who knows? It was off the record. It was midnight at the bar and conversation, which was with the senior executive at Commure, which is the company which has been given, I think, $500 million by General Catalyst to build a new quote unquote operating system for healthcare. And the discussion was basically, are we going to, is this going to change healthcare? And every time I said, well, I pressed her on this issue, what's going to happen? What are you going to do? It came down to, with their new tools, they were going to help big established healthcare systems be a little bit more efficient. And, my basic point, and I think it says what I'm right, is that, you may do very well. You may make money for your investors. You may become a big player, a la the next Epic or whatever, by doing that. But you're not really going to change the nature of healthcare if you're just making the big established hospital systems, who are all sitting on massive reserves and doing pretty much what they've been doing for the last 20 years. If you just made them a bit more efficient, that's not going to change the basic underlying problems of cost, quality, access to primary care, et cetera, because those organizations don't do that. And after about 45 minutes, we agreed to disagree and have another gin. But it was I think there's a lot of that going on. I see a lot of people making partnerships with big systems, with big established incumbents. I see the incumbents dipping their toes in a lot of waters with these new players. I don't see many people coming on the scene saying, okay, American healthcare is big, fat, and inefficient. We're going to take it over. The way that Amazon did to retail or something like that. So
this has been kind of the meta conversation at these things for years and years and years, right? Is it the incumbents and the startups, and how do we affect change?
Well, I mean, but Jenna, what I'd say is that you think about it, go back to the Oscar thing, right? Those new plans, Oscars and Clovers and Bright Health and all those guys, and somebody said devoted, we didn't hear so much about them, were going to come on board, and they were going to like sort of, do Medicare Advantage in a whole new way. And the answer is that they're, in terms of they're a rounding error, even if they had, they're a rounding error in terms of number of people in Medicare Advantage compared to the big guys, compared to Humana and United. And the same thing is true on the provider side compared to the big provider groups.
But the hope would be that if these innovators really do improve efficiency, that then the big companies will copy them, right? Or buy them. And then you might see efficiency at scale.
Maybe, or maybe I'm very much of the opinion of, you have to be, the old guard has to be put out of business by the new guard if things are going to change. My sense is that we should have seen, we've had, I know it's not anything on the scale of a $4 trillion health system, but we should have, we've had, what is it now, 60, 70 billion in venture capital go in over the last couple of years. And it hasn't moved the needle on any of this stuff in terms of changing the system. Some companies are doing things more effectively, more efficiently. And there are certainly new, benefits and probably better care for certainly in the employer market and potentially Medicare Advantage. We started talking about, Hinge Health, who now are up to 1,000, in the musculoskeletal space, are up to 1,000 customers, employer customers. And I suspect there are a lot of employees out there who have bad backs who are getting better care than they were before because of it. But I don't think you can argue that the mega trend is changing dramatically the way, we talked about all these years. You and I have been talking about disruption in other industries, and when it's come to healthcare, and it has happened in other industries, and it's still very much on the margins in healthcare.
So this is moving on a little bit, but I think an interesting segue given this conversation about where's change going to come from and what are the disruptors doing. Amazon Clinic announcement during the show, if not technically at the show, I don't know, but
I think it was. I think Aaron Martin was on a panel, was on the main stage talking about it, I believe.
Yeah. Aaron Martin was, and Nora Yoga, I think. My take is, here's what we've been waiting for from Amazon, and it's simultaneously underwhelming and kind of brilliant, right? Because they're doing, I think, very little, but they are doing what they do best. With this Amazon Clinic offering, which is really just sort of like a aggregator marketplace for third-party telehealth providers that accrues most of its value from being associated with Amazon.com. Do you see it differently? What's your take?
Overall, Amazon has been the most disappointing thing that's happened in healthcare in the last year to me, because, like I said, you're right. It is this thing. I actually went and played with it this morning a little bit because I haven't seen it. And you can go online and you can select which condition you think you have, and then you get directed to one or two or three sort of second tier telehealth providers. And I assume that the meds come to you from I think Amazon Pharmacy. So
you can get them other ways, but the suspicion is that Amazon Pharmacy is going to be the easiest way, and then
and basically it's the same thing as our typical marketplace, right? And they sell. If you think about their overall marketplace, they sell a lot of sell a lot of third party goods, where sometimes they do the fulfillment, sometimes they don't do the fulfillment, and where they get a cut. And they also sell advertising. And they promote people so they use their clout as a consumer marketplace rather than as a retail store.
Yeah, they're a logistics organization. They're an extremely good and prescient of changing tech and market forces logistics organization. It took the whole world years and years and years to realize that's what they were, but I think now we kind of get it.
Well, but they do provide services in other areas, right? AWS being the biggest one. They do provide services that they've developed internally.
But even AWS is an infrastructure play, right? I don't know.
Well, let's unpeel it a little bit, right? So what they've done is they essentially said, we think there's enough business. And I don't know how huge this is, because it's very much what Roe and Hims have been building, and those are, I would say, nice little businesses. They need to figure out how to make more money, but and they've probably got overfunded. But they are direct to consumer, very limited businesses, very limited problems. And anytime you say that the kind of issue we're dealing with is hair loss or male sexual health, you know kind of where they're going, right? So I think that you could argue it's a limited thing. The Amazon Cares, had it expanded, was what I was looking for. Was like, could you build a virtual or hybrid national national primary care plus brand that would actively go to employers and say, we are able to come here and be cheaper, better, faster than what you're currently getting from the main providers you're doing. And we can, because we're so big, the plans can't ignore us. And therefore we can build, a lot of people talk about this virtual Kaiser of the 21st century. I've heard that 3 or 4 times before. I heard it from a couple of people at Health. And I was expecting that Amazon, but nobody has got real heft to build that. Most people who could have done that, like Teladoc, have gone back to try to sell more to the current incumbents. There are some people trying to build that. Firefly is, to some extent, you'd argue Crossover is, but they're not doing it with, the Amazon heft behind them. And I thought Amazon Cares was going to do that. They announced that they were going to do that. They announced they were going to build clinics and do it online and have visits to the home. I thought, oh, this is pretty interesting. They could use Amazon's distribution, but also build a new infrastructure of primary care. And, I don't know what the internal discussions were within Amazon, but after doing that for not very long, less than, offering it to other clients for less than 18 months, they killed it and instead bought, One Medical, which is I'm a member. It's a great service. I like the people there, but it's an extremely niche type of primary care that is not anything close to value-based care. It's the most expensive fee-for-service primary care place out there. So they bought they were building the equivalent of, I don't know, a cheaper Safeway, and they instead gave up and bought, the tiniest Whole Foods market they could find. So I'm confused about where they're heading. Now they're segmenting the market for money. They're not really going to try and change healthcare fundamentally. Is my opinion.
I think that's probably true. Although, the other thing about Amazon is that you can't underestimate them, because they do start with an MVP and then grow it in ways that you might not have expected. I mean, that's the other kind of thing. So maybe this is, I mean, I think the optimistic idea is that this is the groundwork, but they're going to add on to it more actual value. One thing that is in favor of that is that this offering doesn't really leverage One Medical Group. So someone suggested on Twitter, and I wish I could give credit, I do not remember who it was, that, maybe One Medical Group is going to be sort of at some point like, oh, hey, this issue is too complicated to handle through telemedicine. Why don't you, engage with this brick and mortar provider that, we own and work with?
I mean that I understand. They could do that, but but right now they're handing them off to other people, right? So most of those other groups, I was looking at who it was in California. HealthTap is the one at the top of the list, and I don't know what HealthTap's relationship is with brick and mortars, but they probably have their own relationship to hand it off to. So I don't know, and even One Medical, which has its own app and its own virtual presence, and then has its bricks and mortars, is in the network of some of the most expensive academic medical centers in the country.
Yeah. So none of this is moving the needle on healthcare, especially for the masses.
I mean, Jonah, it's the same old story. If you came down as an alien from outer space, you looked at American healthcare and you looked at everybody else, you go, everybody else has 75% generalists and a few specialists. And, everyone gets covered by the generalists and most stuff that gets taken care of. And they all spend, 9 to 10% to 12% of their GDP. And here we have, 25%, if 20% generalists, 80% specialists. A lot of people don't get covered. There's incredibly uneven care. We spend 18 to 20% of our GDP. None of what we've seen from these players, which I was hoping would start to fix that equation, is going to do it. And we're not going to see any policy that's doing it. Partly because, go back to the Medicare thing, there's now this big argument between, is it ACOs, do we do shared savings, do we do Medicare Advantage, and there's how we try to transform the big fee-for-service Medicare program is still, there is no unanimity on that, right? And there is obviously there's disputes between former Democrats running the show, former Democrats who were running the show, the current Democrats who are running the show, Republicans who were on the show, and probably will be again in 4 or 8 years, as to how this gets done. And you can tell that most of the activity, and I listened in on the CEO of Optum, and Bertha Coombs, I felt could have been a bit, she's a tough journalist, could have been a bit more aggressive with him. She kept on saying that Optum was big and buying stuff, but it was getting close to being a monopoly in some places. But she let him get away with saying, well, we're going to be transforming care, but it didn't really explain how or why, what their principles were of solving that bigger problem we've talked about. But we do know that Optum, it came out, is very, very good at making a lot of money, right? It makes about half the money for United Health Group, which is $5 billion in profit a quarter. And he did say, we're going to continue, we'll give, it's been said publicly many times, they so half of that goes back to the dividends to shareholders and half of that goes to buy stuff. So they're going to keep acquiring stuff, and we worry about all those money losing venture back companies on the show floor. They're not one of them. They make plenty of money, whatever they do. And they will be the destination for a lot of the companies, on the show floor, and already have been. So, to me, that is again, if you look for moving the needle change that we talk about in the big picture, it's sadly not coming out of this industry. And I got to say, I'm a bit of a depressive, because when I was getting into it back in, I used to be a cynic in the 90s and early 2000s. But when I got, after the Clinton thing all fell apart, but when I got back into it in 2008, and then there was the High Tech Act and the Affordable Care Act, and this money started coming into this industry, and you could see the consumer activity going on, I started thinking, maybe this will actually change. But 10 years later, 10, 12 years later, it clearly hasn't.
So we're probably past the time when I should end this podcast. We haven't really talked about pharma at all, and that is ostensibly what this podcast is about. So
now you work for Roberta, you have to care about drug companies. Let me ask you. I mean, I didn't. There obviously were people from drug companies floating around. I know that because Chris DeLuca, my friend from Sanofi Ventures, was one of the people who grabbed me I was hobbling, and he actually almost half carried me to a beanbag to lie me down when my back went out. So, what was your sense about what the pharma folks were up to, and how much they were giving away?
Yeah, thanks for throwing this one back to me, Matt.
Well, you're now a pharma reporter, Johnny. You have to figure it out.
There were actually a lot of life sciences people there, but by and large, they weren't anchoring panels. They weren't on the big, main fireside chats. They were but they were representatives on different panels. I saw from Bristol Myers Squibb, from AbbVie, from AstraZeneca. I'm sure there were more, but it was a pretty good. And then Roche and Bayer both made announcements. Teva made an announcement, so that they were there. Interesting, at Frontiers, the last time you and I were at an event together, I felt like the digital therapeutics were kind of the really big thing. Coming out of that show, you would have thought that's the main hot topic in life sciences right now. At Health, there was some talk about digital therapeutics, but really it felt much more like a sideshow, whereas clinical trials were everywhere. That was the big thing. And I mean, I think it kind of makes sense at this kind of multi-stakeholder show, because clinical trials tie in so well with all the other conversations we're having about data. How we're using data and how we're generating data. And I think that is an area where, real sea change in the healthcare system could come from, is if we really do crack this code that we've been trying to crack for a decade or more, don't get me wrong, of collecting data, using it smartly, running it through AI and machine learning systems that are getting better and better, making it available to everyone in terms of clinicians in a way that doesn't violate people's privacy. And, like Halamka was talking about in his talk on stage, to me, that's one of the most promising areas of literally transforming healthcare, not just iterating on it. And clinical trials, I think, are really tied into that, because clinical trials are all about data collection, but their methods of data collection have been, the same for 50 years.
Right.
And now they are changing in 6 different ways all at once. I'm super fascinated by this. I'm probably going to write a column about it, but there's, this realization and really strong focus on trying to make them representative of populations and diversify them, which is like long overdue. There's the decentralization that is also long overdue that they've been trying to do since 2012, but COVID made them actually start doing it. And then there's all this stuff about, AI models, real world data, like just completely reinventing what a clinical trial is and what it looks like. And all these changes are interconnected and they're all happening at once. And at the same time, the innovation folks sense this. And so they're also being bombarded by new players. I mean, CVS launched their clinical trial business, I think, almost 2 years ago. And then a year later, Walmart and Walgreens both got into clinical trials. So that, you can see right there, like, not only are the big players, the traditional clinical trial players, kind of completely reinventing what they do, but everybody now wants a piece of clinical trials. And so that's, to me, at Health, that was the big story that I was interested in. I almost can't even articulate it because it has so many moving pieces. But if I had to try, I would say, COVID opened a door to decentralization and new trial designs. It created a little wiggle room with the sort of boogeyman of regulatory, which I think pharma used as an excuse to not experiment more with clinical trial designs for a long time. And then the country's sort of reckoning on race timed at the same time as the pandemic, largely. And the realization that these decentralized tools would also allow us to recruit and incorporate populations we couldn't get in touch with before has sort of caused this to be like a double effect where we're trying to make more efficient trials, and also we're thinking hard about who's in trials. But none of this is easy. None of it is coming easily. And as always at these innovation events, you see the leading edge, and you can fall victim to the illusion that this is happening more widespread than it is. But to me, everyone is thinking about it. Everyone is pouring resources into it. I do think like it's the beginning of a big change. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong.
No, I'd say you're dead right. You put that really well. I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I'm getting quite close with one of my former colleagues at Health 2.0, Drew Bosai, who runs a company called Pluto Health, and they are the little engine inside doing the sort of analytics and patient identification, and a bunch of other stuff, and data gathering, and a bunch of other stuff that they're doing for both Walmart and Walgreens in this exact space. And it's pretty interesting because there's two, as you mentioned one thing going on, which is, yes, we're getting different people into clinical trials because, and this came up with Cheryl Pegas from Walmart, right? Which is when she was on my panel, she's saying, we're making community health workers, we're going to rural areas, we're doing stuff in places where we're it, right? And similar, I've had conversations from Walgreens about their presence in places like the south side of Chicago, where there are no, people recruiting for clinical trials, but there's Walgreens, right? So I think the getting to a diversified population, the realization that clinical trials have been, too middle class, too white, for far too long, is one thing. The second thing, the only thing you didn't bring up, which is a big part of it, is that the access to data now, this is the 21st Century Cures Act. The reason Walmart, Walgreens, or others can start getting into the business is because they can now get data. Everyone can get data from everywhere. It's not just them, right? Epic's going to get into this as well, and everybody else, because you can access everyone's EMR data, and that starts to enable you to figure out who the hell should be in the trial. And to some extent, especially in some of the cancers, the trial is not just a trial. The trial is actually clinical care. And I think that you're right. This is an area where there's a ton of change. And of course, unlike that argument about value-based care and fee for service and is it a good idea or not, who's going to make money, if you as a pharma company can get your drug through the clinical trial quicker, better, for a more targeted population faster, and get it on the market soon and get it approved quicker, that's an immediate ROI to doing this thing better. So that it makes sense, yes, they're hidebound old institutions who've been doing the same thing, forever. I know Bayer.
The money's there, right?
But the money's there, right? Bayer always goes around, it's 175 years old or whatever it is compared to these upstarts, and they've done things the same way forever. But yeah, you put a couple of $1 billion drug on the market a few months earlier, it really makes a difference to the bottom line. So I think it's a fascinating place. I think you're dead right. Your explanation of it was really of the multiple different things going on there is really fascinating. Love that.
I would add that there's so much more I want to say about what startups are doing in this space, but I actually went to Naomi Fried's Farm Stars demo day, and there's a blackout period. I'm not allowed to talk about it until until December 8th.
What you were told in conference, what you were told in the pub.
Exactly. But I will just say, stay tuned, because the startups are an even more interesting part of this story, I think, in some ways. As always, you can look to the startups as possible visions of where the industry is headed. All right. Well, I've kept you for a long time. You need to rest up and feel better.
Actually, I appreciate it, because this conversation is making me forgetting that my back hurts. Although I'm about to move and then it'll start hurting again. But
final thoughts in general about the show. What did you love? What did you hate?
It's kind of funny. I was very cynical as to whether, go back to health itself, was whether it was going to make it, because I just didn't know there was enough, interest. And, you've done Moby Health News. I did. We knew what the audience was back in the mid-teens. And the fact that they've managed to grow the audience so significantly that it's now a serious rival to our old friends at HIMSS, it is remarkable. But it also says that, there's a ton of interest. Now, the big question is going to be, almost everybody I spoke to was doing, the big guys had done layoffs. They were trying to conserve their cash. Clearly, the venture capital market is retrenching, even though there is still money around. I mean, there was a $300 million round at the end of the show, right, for a dispatch, and there was $90 million for Maven during the show. But so there were some big rounds, but nothing like what we saw, 18 months ago. So I guess my question is, I don't think we end up with a .com bust where there's like nobody there next year. And the health folks are, they're going full steam ahead. They're going to Europe. They're doing, they're doing the thing with Vive, with Chime. They seem to think that this is going to be a big business going forward. I guess the real question is, does the quote unquote digital health industry manage to stay together and to keep, even just at this level where 10,000 people will show up in Vegas at one time? Is that going to stay around, or are we going to see that dip significantly next year because life is going to get tougher? I did meet at least 3 of my friends who I thought were working for various companies, all of whom have been laid off and looking for jobs. So
let me take this back around to something you said earlier, which I also had a conversation on this same topic with another journalist, I think. You mentioned it's not very themed. And I very much felt that at Health. It was a lot of extremely impressive people talking about a lot of different things. I mean, it's a multi-stakeholder show. There's a huge benefit to having all these different people from all these different parts of healthcare together and get them to talk about things from their different perspectives. And I heard that refrain a lot. We have to collaborate to do this. We've got to, all play on each other's strengths. That's all great. Kumbaya. But I do think that's what makes it hard to really organize a show this big around themes and still get everyone in. What I think is going to start happening, and has started happening, but I don't know if it's going to start happening more, especially as economic forces come into play, is that we start to think of digital health as a bunch of discrete but interconnected sub-industries. And we start to see more hyper-focused conferences like Brendan Spiegel's VR conference, that really delve into one area where all the startups and companies have really specific things in common, and there's really specific issues they can get into. Like the digital therapeutics conferences is another one. To me, those almost have, I don't want to say they have more value, but they have a more concrete value proposition for a person who's working in that space and a journalist who's covering that space. And so that's interesting. I mean, I guess in the end, it'll be just an ecosystem. But there is definitely a limit to how much a big conference can do when it comes to really fostering those meaningful conversations that really make progress and move forward.
I'd agree. I would just say one thing, which is that health is predicated on, venture capital, startups, and large, predominantly outsiders, but also, insiders who want to become more dominant, i.e. Optum, Elevance, Walgreens, CVS, all these folks, right? And so long as they are, it's not really. I mean, I know there are people from Mayo and traditional healthcare insiders and Kaiser there, but it's not really the kind of quote unquote healthcare insiders conference that HIMSS is, right? Which is predominantly hospitals, the IT folks who service hospitals. In fact, somebody mentioned this morning, Epic didn't even have a booth at, I think CERN had a small one. Maybe I certainly saw some Oracle people around. But, the big IT vendors who service the hospitals, which is where most health IT has gone and where most money is spent in the US, weren't there. And the hospitals aren't really there. They're a bit more there at the Vive Chime show, but again, that's really HIMSS's land.
I think Oracle's the exception, but
if that lot if those outside forces stay around, if the investors stay around, if the health plans are continuing to be more aggressive into more, acquiring stuff, becoming, much more like providers and et cetera that we're seeing, I think this stays for a while because, that money tap isn't switching off immediately. And, it'll, so I think that it'll be it can be an interesting show. We will have to see. I don't foresee a collapse in the show or in that segment, that sector. So I hope not, because I still need a job.
I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. But people will tend to sort of doom and gloom and pick apart. I hope not. I really do enjoy this show, and I got a little sentimental on Twitter, but it is really nice to just get together with all the people who have been really sweating it out to build this industry over the last 10, 15 years. And I do think there's a lot of value there. So it was nice to see you, Matt. As always, I think we only spoke briefly here. We got to spend a little more time together in Milan.
Absolutely.
But I hope you, I hope you got something out of the show other than a back injury. And I hope you feel better soon.
Well, unfortunately, right now it's the thing I'm thinking the most of. I did have one of those fun meetings. One of the meetings I had was when I was lying on my back was with Heather Fernandez from Solve Health. And when they came out, I said something very rude on Twitter, something like, Google already does this. This company is going to go nowhere, and she's now done really well. And I got to have an entire, I was totally wrong meeting with her for 30 minutes, and it was. She was very charming about it, but you could tell that she was going, "Ha, got one over you, bozo," which was great. So it's good that you can have that. It's also fun to say that people like you and me who prognosticate try and make comments about the system.
This is the occupational hazard of being a person with takes,
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Always a pleasure. And I appreciate you jumping in on this tonight. I hope you feel better soon.
Thanks so much, Jonah. Great chatting with you.
That concludes this episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about other installments in the series at pharmaphorum.com/podcast. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, Stitcher, and Podme, where you can find and subscribe by searching for pharmaphorum. And don't forget to visit our website, where you can sign up for daily news and analysis bulletins, and to follow us on Twitter at pharmaphorum. Thanks for listening.